Hello! In this video, I want to talk to you about the maybe unconventional but very cheap and quite effective way that I fertilize my indoor houseplants and seedlings. But first, really quick, I want to talk about when I fertilize everything. So mostly I fertilize during the times where the plant is growing actively. So during the winter, my houseplants stay kind of dormant, especially when they only really receive the sunlight that's coming from the window. I do often put grow lights on top of that. My citrus trees get grow lights on them all throughout the winter. Some of my houseplants do as well. Maybe not throughout the whole winter, just to, cut down on my electricity usage. But for the times where I know my plants aren't going to be getting a lot of sun, maybe they are experiencing colder than normal temperatures, they won't need as much fertilizer. But during the growing season, I like to keep all of my watering, my fertilizing very simple. So during the growing season, I pretty much keep things simple. For my houseplants, I water them maybe once every week or once every 2 weeks, just depending on the pot size and just how often I see the soil drying out. When it comes to when to fertilize, there are just a few rules that I follow. It's easy enough for me to keep track of it at the scale that I'm at, so maybe this might or might not work for you as well. These are just my couple of rules that I keep for myself. If I fertilize my plant during one watering, I'm not going to fertilize it again the next. They need to have at least one watering in between each time they get fertilizer. That's just pure filtered tap water. And that's because I don't want to be over fertilizing. I don't want to be causing mineral or salt buildup in the soil. I want to make sure I am flushing out whatever excess there is in the soil. Also, usually once a season, and it's usually in the beginning of spring, I'll scratch in some granular solid fertilizer. I just did this with my pepper plant. I used Job's or Espoma organic granular fertilizer. Scratch that into the surface. There are instructions of how much you should be putting. I just kind of eyeball it and try not to put too much for how big the container is. And I know that I'll just be checking up on it every now and again. Another rule that I follow, and this is related to my indoor seedlings, the seedlings that I start from seed, I won't fertilize them until they have at least 1 or 2 sets of true leaves. Usually, honestly, it's at 2 sets of true leaves. So these seedlings get most of their energy when they're first growing from the seed itself, and I just want to respect that and let it do its thing. There is some nutrients in the potting soil I use as well, even though I do reuse a lot of my potting mix. I just don't want to overload or burn these little seedlings. And also for seedlings, even when they do get to the first or second set of true leaves, I am not going to fertilize them at full strength. So if I'm using, a store-bought product, I'm not going to follow the directions. I'm going to go either half or a quarter of what they suggest. But a lot of my fertilizing comes from this other source, and I do this a little bit more often. I use that fertilizer a little bit more often than I use the store-bought ones. I'm a lot more free with how often I use it. Typically I'll use it for just waterings. It doesn't contain all the nutrients that a plant needs, but it does contain a significant amount of nitrogen, so that's great. It's great for seedlings when they need to be putting on vegetative growth. It's great for a lot of houseplants that are mostly, foliage and I don't expect to flower or produce any fruit. And that fertilizer that I produce in my home and that I use so often is the wastewater from my fish tank. This is my 30-gallon fish tank that I've had for maybe 3 or 4 years. Currently, it has 7 little silver tip tetras in it. I used to have one fancy goldfish. I don't think I'll do that again. It had health problems, it got bloated, and it died. It was very traumatic for me. I kept these tetras though. This is more than enough space for them in this 30 gallons. I've already started a bit of a water change. I've been cleaning off the glass. It's had a bit of algae in it. Now, algae in the fish tank really isn't that bad. It's more just an aesthetic thing. When it gets to be too much over too long period of time, I would just worry about the water quality in that case. So I've been cleaning a bit of that off. There's still a bunch left on the bottom. Recently, my water filter, the pump broke. So I've just been running a bubbler in it with a sponge around it. I put the filter tank media. It's very porous, so it's a lot of surface area for good bacteria to live on. I put that near the bubbler as well. It doesn't get such good like water flow all throughout the tank, which is why a lot of the particles are just staying hanging around at the bottom. So I'm just gonna have to keep up on some more water changes while this is broke. I do have a plan for it. I don't wanna buy another one. These things just keep breaking on me. They're so quick to break. I have another setup in mind for this, so in the meantime, before I get that done, I'll just keep up with water changes, run the bubbler. Thankfully, this is a lot more water volume than these tetras need, so I think it'll be fine. Now I'm not worried about keeping up with the water changes on this because I do use the water that I take out of this tank as fertilizer for a lot of my plants. I've been doing this for years now. I use it as fertilizer for a lot of my house plants. I'm a little bit hesitant to use it for some of my vegetable seedlings indoors, but I do use it for a lot of my flower seedlings just because I'm not sure of all the chemicals that are going into this tank. I do want to make it more organic moving forward, something that I'd be a lot more confident with using the tank water to grow my seedlings, to grow my vegetable seedlings. I have some philodendron growing in this. The roots are just spread throughout the water. It's been fine. There's a lot of new growth on this. I have stopped putting the light on this, so they've stalled a little bit, and I've kind of closed the curtains in these rooms. I'll keep them opened up. I'll keep light on them, and I'm sure they'll grow fine. I have also some Java fern in here. Again, they've also been suffering a little bit just because of the lack of light, but I will get this tank cleaned up. I'll remove any of the brown leaves and just any particles, fish poop that is along there on the bottom, and I'll be using that water for my plants. So the reason why this aquarium water makes for good fertilizer is that it contains a lot of nitrates. So when fish eat their food and digest it and it goes through them, they will create wastes in the form of ammonia. This ammonia gets broken down by beneficial bacteria in the tank. They live on the surface of like the sand, of the walls, any surface that they can find, which is why I use this porous material as a substrate for that bacteria to grow on. There's just a lot of surface area because it's so porous. If you think of it's not only on the outside of this, but it's all throughout the middle that the bacteria can stick onto and grow on. So where was I? So this whole cycle that's going on in here is called the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle. So fish go about their tank, eat their food, and they produce waste in the form of ammonia, or NH4. Now ammonia is very toxic to fish. Beneficial bacteria number 1 comes in, takes that ammonia and converts it into NO2, which is nitrite. Now nitrite is also toxic to fish. It's not as toxic as ammonia, but it's still pretty bad and the fish don't want to be inside of it. So beneficial bacteria number 2 comes in and turns that nitrite into nitrate, NO3. Nitrates are less toxic to the fish than both nitrites and ammonia, which is great. So you have this bacteria working to make this tank less toxic. The only thing is that there's no bacteria to then convert nitrates into something that is not at all toxic to the fish. However, nitrates, NO3, that is the compound by which plants uptake their nitrogen. So you have aquatic plants in the fish tank and that's absorbing some nitrates, to produce foliage, to produce new leaves. I have my philodendron hanging off the corner there of my fish tank. It's taking up some of the nitrates as well. Algae does the same thing. So some of the nitrates are leaving the fish tank. That way, it's pretty regular maintenance to do for fish tanks are water changes, where you take a percentage of the water from that fish tank out and you put in fresh water. So the water that you're taking out contains nitrates. It might contain a little bit of residual nitrites or ammonia that hasn't been broken down yet. You're removing it and you're putting in some fresh water that doesn't have any of that in, and it doesn't completely remove all of the nitrates and stuff from the water, but it does remove a significant amount. It really dilutes the water of all those toxic compounds. You'll never be completely rid of the nitrates if you have fish living in there, which is fine, just as long as it doesn't get to a high enough concentration where your fish are uncomfortable. So what I'm gonna do now is just finish up this water change. I have 2 buckets here with me. One is full of clean water that's just been it's been out here for a day just to sit and to get to room temperature, because the water that's coming out of my filter is very cold right now. It's coming from outside. I don't want to shock my fish with the super cold temperature. So I'm gonna pull some of this dirty water full of gunk and nitrates and good nitrates out, and then put the clean water in. And I use this little siphon. It's just a tube that runs into this bucket. It has a little pump here, and here is where I'll suck up all of the goop. It has a little filter at the end here, just for any big debris that get into it, but I'll try and pull out anything that looks like it shouldn't be there, any dead leaves and such. Okay, so I got through my water change. Here is my 5-gallon bucket full of this dirty water, this wastewater that's full of nitrogen. I am gonna take this to my other room, to the plant bar, and get everything watered. I like using this small little watering can in this 5-gallon bucket. It's easy for me to just dip this in and get a little canful. Oh, and what I will also do for my air plants is once a week, or usually it's just whenever I have a fresh bucket of this available, I'll just dip it into the bucket. I might leave it for just a couple of minutes and then bring it up to dry. They don't like to be in water all the time, but a nice good dunk for a couple of minutes is great once a week. And with fertilizer, this is the way that they intake all of their nutrients, is through the leaves, through that water. I also have a couple of sprays for foliar fertilizer. This one is orchid food. I have another one specifically for air plants. It's much the same. I just spray it on the foliage if I'm not doing this. It provides a little bit more well-rounded of nutrients. This one has 0.025% nitrogen, 0.021% phosphate, and 0.021% soluble potash, which is potassium. It has potassium in it, K2O. Here is another way that I will fertilize. Again, this I feel like gives complete nutrition to the plants. It's Neptune's Harvest. Has 2% nitrogen, 3% phosphate, and 1% soluble potash. I'll give a good dose of this to my citrus plants right now, and then I'll do a very, very small amount for my seedlings. So there's always some instructions on these things, but I just eyeball it most of the time. Oh, and give it a good shake. So I always put the fertilizer in first and then add the water to the can. That way I can just mix it up as I'm filling it with water. The less things I use, the less things that get dirty, and the more clean overall things are. So I'm also going to get to fertilizing this flat of seedlings. It has my violas, it has some eucalyptus seedlings, some snapdragons, some lisianthus that I pulled out of soil blocks just as a test and put it into these cell packs to try and compare how they grow on between the soil blocks and these cell packs. Anyways, I still have some of this fertilizer left solution. I don't know if you can see, it's less than a quarter. I'm just gonna dilute this with more water, and then I'm gonna go ahead and water this. A great way to fertilize and just water in general your seed trays like this is to bottom water. It really makes sure that all of the soil in each cell pack, like from the top to bottom, sometimes I only really get the top, it really makes sure that everything gets wet. So I'm just pouring this fertilizer solution directly into the tray, and I'll wait a couple of minutes maybe just to make sure everything gets drawn up into the cell packs, and then I will dump out or reuse on a different tray any remaining water. I'll just tip it into the sink, or in this case I am going to use it for some other seedling flats that I have. Now for these I'll usually also use my aquarium water, but it's getting to be spring, it's getting a lot sunnier out there. There's still a lot more frost left in the season, but these might go out to the hoop house early, not the eucalyptus, maybe the violas, the lisianthus, the snapdragons. So I just really want to give them a good boost of nutrients, really start to see them growing more in the next couple of weeks. And sometimes, I don't think there's any on here, but sometimes you'll have maybe a cell that got a little bit too dried out, and then bottom watering it like this doesn't work. It doesn't wick up any moisture because soil can become hydrophobic once it's completely dry. Then I just go in and top water as well. And this honestly makes things go a lot faster. So that's how I fertilize my plants, my indoor plants and my seedlings. I'm just gonna go ahead and use the last of this aquarium water on the rest of my seedlings. I think my lisianthus could use some fertilizing. Thanks for watching. Bye.